Hi, welcome to Beyond Loneliness. This is one of the podcasts that I plan to use as a platform for people who are suffering from loneliness, depression, anxiety. And I am delighted to have Dr. Tracy Broad today with me. She's a socialist studying workplace happiness, and her work has been translated into 22 languages. She's author of The Secrets to Happiness and Bring Work to Life. I'm truly delighted to have you, Tracy. Thank you very much for accepting my invitation. It's early morning for you. How are you?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Looking forward to our conversation. It's such an important topic, so really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. To begin with, and I've always been curious about the other side. How would people feel? So, and you've done plenty of researches, particularly in studying loneliness in people. How do you see it impacting people at workplace, particularly? What do you think is going on?
Yeah, I mean it's really significant now. I mean we're talking about an epidemic of loneliness globally where, there's new research every day about the number of people who are struggling with depression, anxiety, mental health issues, and especially loneliness. And I think a really big part of it is that the landscape of work has changed, right? And there are lots of places where we can work differently, we can work remote, we can work hybrid, and those are great. There's benefits to that, but we're not necessarily connecting with others in the same way. So I know we'll unpack all of that, but it's a really significant issue. And the really interesting thing is that we're not connecting just in our day-to-day interactions as much anymore. Like, we used to talk to the barista, now we order on the app, right? We used to talk to the checkout person, and now we get a delivery at our door. And those superficial connections statistically contribute to our happiness and fulfillment, but we're not getting them in kind of day to day life. So I think work takes on a really important role. Like, it's where we feel seen, it's where we feel connected. But then if we have more distance in our work, it's troubling too. So it's just a really big issue that we need to work together to figure out.
Absolutely, and I was reading an article and it said the little conversations at the checkout counter or in the parking lot when you're going out grocery shoppings, at workplace, the lunch that we have together, the conversations that we save for a later time during the tea breaks and coffee machine chit chats, all they're all gone.
Yeah.
And even if, let's say, people have returned back to work, I mean, a lot of them have, but do you think it's the same as it was? And obviously, loneliness is not it's not today's making. It has been kind of building up for long now, for decades.
Yeah, you
What
make a
changed so
great point.
dramatically? Yeah.
Yeah, you make a great point. I mean, there's some really interesting research about how a lot of the things we're struggling with today have kind of been in the making, right? And the pandemic really accelerated a lot of things and
Hmm.
exacerbated a lot of things. So I think your point is really well taken. And, even if we're back in the office, we may be maybe more structured. We may not be there as many hours as usual. We may be more focused on task and less on relationship with each other. And, we get a lot out of our conversations when we're standing in line at the coffee bar or the coffee machine, right? We get a lot when we're, I don't know, waiting in the elevator lobby with other
Yes.
people. And if we have less of those just casual interactions, it can really make us feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not sure that I feel seen or feel known or know others as much
Yes.
anymore.
Absolutely. And I think when people, so stepping into workplace is like, obviously it's not the same, but I when I teach meditation and stuff, I ask people that who reaches out work first, your mind or your body? And a lot of people have the answer, and they pause for a moment and then think about it and say, I've never thought about that, but it's definitely the mind, and not always for good reasons. And you can be excited and you can reach the work before your body does, but in a lot of cases, that's a sign of anxiety as well. Stepping into workplace, so that kind of connection, that meaning with the work that we do, things that we do at work, and little things, little conversations, that seems to be disappearing for some reason. how do you think it translates to people's personal lives?
Oh, there's tons of research on this as well, where there's this spillover effect. And so there's literally documentation that if you're less happy, satisfied, fulfilled at work, you'll actually feel that outside of work as well. Just that general sense of malaise, that general sense of dissatisfaction or unhappiness or lack of fulfillment. And the opposite is true as well. If your experience outside of work actually affects your perceptions inside of work. Like, it's a holistic experience, this idea of work life. So it's so interesting, right? We want to develop relationships within the work environment, but also if we're developing relationships outside of the work environment, that contributes to happiness on both sides. But I think like the work that you do around mindfulness and meditation and presence, I think is also uniquely important, because I think we're at this moment where a lot of the popular press is talking about work is a grind, work is terrible, less work is better. And in reality, we get a lot of fulfillment out of feeling like we make a difference, like we're making a contribution. And if we're not like present at work, if we're not fully present there, fully mindful there, then we may be missing out on some of the benefits of being there in the first place. So I think that intersection of the work that you're doing and the importance of the role of work itself is just an interesting one as well.
Absolutely. And I got really interested in your work is when I was reading that article of yours about workplace loneliness, and you made great points. And I was also reading some interviews and reading blogs, as in people propose solutions like, hey, we need to be more engaging, we need to be more mindful and stuff. Those are all great points, but I'm curious if I am the only one thinking, because I have experienced loneliness in my life for a prolonged period. So, my work has really got me to the profoundness of loneliness, and how you identify personal, social, and existential. And when you propose that idea to people, and people can sort of contemplate and see, what am I experiencing? Am I going through some kind of existential crisis, or is it that social disconnection at work and in the community around me, or is it I personally feel the absence of some particular figure in your life, someone, let's say a father figure or a brother or someone, and then I sort of try to compare and say, okay, people. I really admire Dr. Vivek Murthy's work on loneliness. He coined the term that it's sadly an epidemic we are living in. But on the other side, I just want to take your opinion on that. What do you think about people who are experiencing any kind of loneliness? And my personal experience has given me that insight that it comes with disability, lack of trust in people, your willingness to form new relationships, going out or doing new things out of the ordinary. And so the community level sort of initiatives and government support and people, those only come into picture once you are willing to accept them, once you're willing to take on those initiatives, be part of a functional community. But who walks with you for that quite long period when you have to be sort of out of that ditch, if you want to put it that way? What do you think we can do individually?
Yeah, I think this is such a good point, right? Like, there's a certain level that we need to own our own levels of well-being, right? Like, I always say in the work experience, leaders don't have a responsibility for your well-being, but they have a responsibility to you. And so you have to kind of own your own level of well-being. But leaders have a responsibility to create the conditions for well-being, right? Like creating the conditions for connection or purpose or learning. And ironically, the harder it is, the more you need those connections. Often it can be hard to create those, right? Like if you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't want to get off the couch. Oh my gosh, I don't want to invite a friend to coffee. Oh my gosh, I don't want to get out to my yoga class. that may be just the moment when you need it most. And so ironically, the it's taking that first step. It's that taking, kind of ownership and creating momentum, right? And that tends to create a positive reinforcing loop, right? Like, oh, I really didn't feel like going to my book group last night, but I did. And that felt really good. I was able to reconnect with some friends and whatever. And so that creates a positive system. So I think you're so right. Like, we can have programs and processes that support people, but then there's also kind of a personal level of agency as well, right? In addition, where we need to kind of get out and trust. I think the other thing that's related to your question that's super important is I think sometimes when we're going through a hard time, we're really focused on ourselves, right? Like, that's the nature of depression, is things feel like they're closing in, and you're literally, physiologically, your vision is more limited. You lose peripheral vision when you're especially stressed or anxious or whatever. You're narrowing in. And one of the things we know about things like depression, anxiety, loneliness, is when you reach out to others and focus on others, it can make a huge difference. So sometimes we're focused on ourselves, like, well, that friend hasn't called me in a while, I feel lonely, or, I haven't heard from so-and-so, I feel lonely. But our opportunity is actually to reach out to others, right? Like, hey, I wonder how so-and-so is doing. I'm going to reach out to them, or, I'm going to initiate a, coffee date or a tea date, right?
Yes.
And so that focus on others is actually very, very correlated with happiness.
Absolutely. I think you made so many great points. And it kind of takes me back to sort of a documentary I was watching. So BBC did that. And in Japan, they have a term called hikikomori, if I'm pronouncing it right. It's a specific term given to people who are socially withdrawn, and so they have isolated themselves. So they interviewed a guy who was in his 40s, and they went to his little apartment. And that guy has spent 20 years in that apartment without, he left only for necessities. And I was so shocked to just one particular statement he made, and that kind of got me thinking. And he said, the interviewer was asking him, hey, why don't you go out and why don't you? He said, I want community to reach out to me. That's such a profound statement. And that's coming from somebody who's really in the middle of it. And I wonder how many people would be thinking that. So I want help. I want to be out of this situation. But I want someone to take that initiative first before I do that. Because it comes with a lot of disability. And I was also, again, another article I was reading about, and there was a guy in 2014. I think I put that on my LinkedIn as well. He said, I'm going to leave my home. And I think it was in Seattle or some other city, and said, I'm going to go to that bridge and I'm going to jump off it, but I won't do it if one person on the way smiles at me. And this letter was found after he took his own life, sadly. So imagine the kind of mindset people are living in, and not just, it's the young adults more at workplaces, universities. What do you think? And obviously, that got me into sort of my work has precisely been the companion with those people who need that personal journey, to walk with them before the community is reachable, before they feel confident. But how do we do that on a large scale, like millions of people right there?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We do know that generationally, there's absolute correlation between loneliness, mental health issues, and chronological age. The younger people are, the more likely they are to struggle with loneliness and disconnection. And the thinking behind that is it has everything to do with social media, which tends to separate us, distance us, limit our communication with each other to just a few characters, right? Or even a long post isn't a whole conversation that has the nuance of, being together and nonverbals and all that kind of thing. So technology is making a really big difference in terms of the generational experience. But also, I think the important thing is like we want to look for connection from our community, but then we also need to offer it. We all have an instinct to matter. So I just think pragmatically, like if it's just a heartbreaking story that guy was waiting for somebody to smile at him, right? Like, and I wonder if he smiled at anybody else, right? Like if he was dour, then maybe he didn't see people smiling at him, or maybe they were smiling and he didn't notice, or maybe if he had smiled at them, they might have smiled back. So you just think pragmatically, like if you reach out and get involved in doing volunteer work or reach out and get involved in a community project, it makes you feel like you matter. Like there's another Japanese term, ikigai, which means your reason for waking up in the morning, right? And it doesn't have to be much. There's a beautiful story about a Japanese grandmother, and her reason for waking up in the morning is to make soup for her family, right? Like I may not be able to solve huge problems in the world, but maybe there's just one person relying on me to, I don't know, make their lunch that day or show up in the meeting that day or whatever. And so I think a really big part of loneliness is not just feeling disconnected from individual people or groups, but feeling disconnected from a sense of purpose. And so I think when we can remind ourselves how we matter, and then when we're reaching out to other people, when we're part of the solution, we might have been, I might have been, you might have been the person that smiled at the guy on the way to the bridge, right? So we have to think about our influence on other people. There's a beautiful sociological concept that the number one way we learn is through watching other people, listening to other people, experiencing other people. So no matter what our role is in life, we have a huge impact on other people just by the way we show up. So anyway, I just think it's a huge opportunity for us to go out of our way to be the one that smiles, to be the one that invites, to be the one that connects, to be the one that makes a contribution to the community.
Absolutely. Another thing I was I'm a curious guy, and so my work has really been into, finding what is at the bottom of things, what is driving things on surface. So a lot of studies, I think, particularly one study that found that 50% of the people, young people struggling with depression, anxiety, and stress, were found to be lonely at the bottom. So loneliness was like something at the bottom driving these symptoms to the surface. And then obviously it got me into studying more about this. So when I was in the monastery, it was sort of a very transformative time. And I think I can say that with own experience that there are three things I found, and I think a lot of people now relate to it when I teach, is three questions. I'm sort of writing a book as well. Who are you? Where are you? And where do you belong? So when people talk about loneliness and say it's not about the absence of people, it's the absence of yourself within. Do you feel connected with yourself? If that's not there, there's no foundation. And if you don't have an identity, you don't have any connection, how are other people going to feel that? They will notice that, of course. And the absence of identity gives people an opportunity to give you an identity that they perceive you as. And which is in a lot of cases is a disconnection. I wonder what you think about that, and because you've been into this, you've done researches, you academically are into it. What do you think about this?
Yeah, oh my gosh, I love your point. That makes so much sense. Two things come to mind especially. One is the idea of the importance of identity and dimensionality. Like sometimes we get a sense of identity from our work, and the popular press would suggest that that's a bad thing, but it's actually a really good thing to get identity from your work. Like, oh, I'm a designer, or I'm a researcher, or I'm a writer, or I'm a whatever, right? Like there's positive self-esteem that comes from an identity that is related to what you do to serve the community. And every job, all work has dignity, no matter what we're doing. It may not feel significant to us, but if we're bringing just that little bit of talent and, connected or our own unique contribution, that makes a really big difference. And Identity works best when we have dimensionality, like when we get identity from a lot of different things. Like, I have my role with my family, I have my role with my community, I have my role in my volunteer work, I have my role at my book group that I play, right? And all of those roles create sort of a kaleidoscope of who I am and what my identity is. So that's one thing that comes to mind, is this importance of dimensionality and the health of identity that is dimensional. The other thing that I think is so interesting related to what you were talking about is the idea of legibility. Like, we prefer people that are easy to read. We prefer people who are more predictable. We like to kind of know where we are, and we shy away from ambiguity. And organizations are like that too. We prefer organizations with clear cultures, with strong messages about, what the organization believes. And so if someone is struggling with their own identity, to your point, it may be hard to get a read on them. It may be hard to feel as connected to them. So the more we come into our own identity, the more we can be confident. At the same time, we're humble and have a sense of humility. The easier it will be for people to connect with us, because we have legibility, right? They can kind of read us, kind of say, oh, I can see what that person's about. They said a few sentences, and so I can start to get to know them. Not in a judgmental way, but just in a way that we're always sensing the people around us. So I love your point about identity. I think that's so related to mental health and well-being.
Absolutely, and I love your work. So you are the vice president at Workplace Insight and Steelcase. You write for Syrian Contributor at Forbes and Fast Company, and I love your articles. Very simple, and I think if I was the one who just needed something to get out of the bed and get going, I find it very relatable. In your experience, Tracy, what kind of feedback do you get from people? You work with employees at workplace, you bring workplace culture transformation. So what is your experience of that, and where do we stand in terms of how far do we have to go to make a sort of a community level change?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that. How do we make community level change? I think part of it is just bringing awareness to the topic, just like you're doing, right? I get a lot of feedback from people about, oh, this article helped, or, oh, I got something out of this, or, oh, this one point made sense to me. And that just means the world to me. And the challenge is there's so much information, and we take in information in bite-sized pieces. So a little bit of my strategy is, I'm never going to solve everything related to loneliness or everything related to well-being. You aren't, nobody is, right? But we can make our little contribution to that thing. And so each article is just a little view, a little lens, a little window onto the situation. And so how do we make community level change? I think we raise awareness about it. I think we have open conversations about it. I think we let other people know where we're at, so we're vulnerable and sharing in a constructive, positive way. I think we're taking action ourselves, like in terms of volunteer work, your community work. I think we're inviting other people in, right? Like we invite other people into the work that we're doing, or we invite somebody to the yoga class that we're going to, or we invite somebody new into our book group, right? Like when we invite people in, wherever we're having those conversations, I think that starts to be community level change, kind of that acting locally idea.
Yeah, yes, and I was thinking sometimes these ideas pop up in my head, or I don't know, out of nowhere, but I feel like can't people do something like, hey, just give us a call to somebody you care about and say, hey, do you want to meet for lunch for no reason? No, yeah. I don't have any agenda in mind. Just let's sit and talk about life, about where we are. And I think we are running so fast that we kind of merge two things. Hey, we have that point to discuss about work or something. Let's make that, let's merge that into a lunch or sort of something else. But just being there. So I work with a lot of young people, and the lives that kind of build around their work and their professional identity is the work. They come back to their apartments and they stare at the phone, and there are no messages, no voicemails, no calls, and just to ask, hey, how was your day? That little thing can make a big change in people's lives. Um, One other question that I thought I would ask you, and there's so much about you. I've actually made a note. I couldn't remember all of it. You've done so much work. You are on the advisory board of Kids Food Basket, and for the Design Museum everywhere. Um, what do you think about the school education setup? Like they say, catch them young. What are we doing enough? You think in terms of preventing that to be sort of cascaded to the young ones?
Yeah, this keeps me awake at night. It really does. We have the youngest generations are so fragile right now. They're fragile in terms of their resilience, their ability to handle stress, their ability to kind of work through issues, both physical, cognitive, emotional. We have in our community, we have a group of high school, we're talking about younger children, but high school as an example here. The high school kids carry stuffed animals to school as their support animals. And I just think, oh, that's just like, it's just so sad, right? It's so sad that they need that level of comfort
Yes.
and support. It's so sad that they don't have that sort of resilience and ability to kind of work through challenges. So I think one of the things we need to do is this is going to sound counterintuitive, but I actually think we need to normalize stress. Like, I think we've gotten to this point where our messaging is, oh my gosh, all stress is bad. If your life isn't like perfect, bonbons and butterflies every minute, you're doing something wrong, or someone's trying to hurt you. The world is a bad place if there's stress. And in reality, we all face stress. We all face ups and downs. We face ebbs and flows. That's part of being human. And so I think to normalize, oh my gosh, you're going to have a hard test. Oh my gosh, you're going to have a teacher that isn't your favorite. Oh my gosh, you're going to have a challenge with a friend. Oh my gosh, you're going to have a challenge later on with maybe boyfriend or girlfriend or, partner. I think to normalize that so that we learn skills in coping instead of saying, oh my gosh, the ideal is to get rid of all those challenges. The ideal is to just know we're going to face them and then be able to kind of work through them, right? To have those coping mechanisms. And I think another thing we can think about with younger generations and in school systems is just like how the grown-ups in those situations are offering support, are reaching out, are being attentive. Because there's some wonderful research that when children go through really hard times, the ones that make it out, the ones that really are able to survive most successfully, had at least one adult in their life, one adult who was paying attention, who asked questions, who kind of, took them by the hand and said, hey, I care, tell me how it's going. And so it's back to that point I was making, that each of us has a huge impact on others, even if we may not realize it. So I think that role of adults in just paying attention, reaching out, asking questions is a really big one with the younger kids.
Absolutely. I can't agree more to that. And in the East, we talk about this idea of oneness, essentially meaning that everything is connected. And I think that principle applies in families, in the community, at workplaces. For example, if loneliness is impacting people at workplace, it's impacting community, it's impacting economy, it's impacting how people are not getting married. People want to have less and less kids, and so many things are connected. And I think if one person, absolutely, and I genuinely believe that instead of calling us citizens of certain countries, we are living in a one large, huge country, which is the world. And one thing happening in some part of the country is impacting everybody, because in moments we see, hear, and absorb everything. on daily basis, notifications and all. And I think you made a great point. I am also sort of worried all the time about the rise of AI. Um, there are two sides that I am sort of comparing. One is the more advanced the AI gets, the more it gets into our lives, the more we are going to crave human connection, the human to human. Because technology, as advanced it can be, it cannot replace that human connection. But on the other hand, we're seeing things like AI girlfriends, AI partners, and AI companions, and those virtual ones. There are people who are creating their avatars and making millions out of that just by voice cloning and stuff. And I think that's doing a damage to our the core of who we are as human beings. What do you think? I'd love to know your opinion on this.
Yeah, I agree. Your language, I really love your language. You said the core of who we are as human beings. Like the core of who we are as human beings is we're connected, we're in relationship, we're always in relationship with others. Even if we're introverts, we need that connectivity with other people to understand ourselves, to feel like we matter to others. Those are fundamental to our mental health and our community. And I think you're so right. Like the scary, like on the one hand, you hear arguments that say, well, if you don't have any friends, maybe you can have an AI friend, right? Which is just heartbreaking. But it's the opportunity cost, because now instead of like crossing the threshold and out of your apartment or your home or whatever, and taking the risk to, invite someone for coffee, even though it may be, kind of scary to do that if you're feeling especially lonely. Now you're spending time with your AI friend, right? And so it's the opportunity cost. It's like empty calories, right? Like it's like if you eat candy corn. Do you have candy corn in
I've
in the
tried.
East?
No, I've spent time in the US. I've tried that.
Right?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
it's pure sugar. It's
Yeah.
just like you could eat candy corn. We have it around Halloween, right? Like you could
Hmm.
eat candy corn and you could be very happy having your like sugar rush, but
Absolutely.
you'll die of malnutrition. There's no redeeming qualities from a
Absolutely.
nutritional standpoint, right?
Yes.
So you think about like an AI friend, okay, I'm interacting, okay, I've got somebody to talk to, but I'm not really getting nourished with real relationships. And then I filled up my time with that AI friend, and I'm not taking the time with real people in real life. So I think that you make such a good point that it has scary implications. And the scary implications too have to do with, are we learning social skills? Are we learning social norms? Are we flexing our muscles? Are we building our muscles in terms of relationships? Like there's some discussion that out of the pandemic, we lost our social muscle. I called it social jet lag, right? Where you
Yeah.
kind of,
True.
right? Like all of a sudden that mixing and mingling event feels harder because I'm kind of out of practice. And so I
Yes.
think we also get out of practice in terms of just having the muscle, the resilience, the skills in connecting with other people.
I think to that point, it's. I love that point. I think in addition to what you've mentioned, we are living in the time of shorts. Like 10, our attention span has shrunk to like 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and I think subconsciously, obliviously, we're trying to compare that attention span to the efforts we have to put in our relationships in real life. Because if one thing goes wrong, and things go wrong all the time, we kind of, there's no trying again. There's no trying. Okay, I'm gonna put more efforts. Just like you said, your social muscle. We are just like, okay, it's not either it's working or not working, or it's there's no middle path. There's no trying. There's no flexibility. And also to the other point, I think the AI stuff happening. It's like you want to go somewhere, but you're running on a treadmill. You're burning the energy. You're not reaching anywhere. You're just there. And I think a lot of people are now switching to that. And I'm genuinely I'm worried about. So as a consequence of all of these things, like These people are going to be our pilots, our cooks, our teachers, our functional members of community in their own capacities. But there's such a battle going on inside. How can we function? Can we have a healthy, functional society when everybody is fighting a battle that they don't even want other people to be involved into them?
Yeah, I literally had this conversation with a few friends last night. Like, these will be the people who are leaders in our society, our caretakers as we get older, right?
Yes, yes.
And that's really, really scary. If we, as a community, at a macro level, if we lose the ability to relate, if we lose the ability to connect, if we lose our social muscle, that will have incredible implications on how much we trust each other, on how much we engage with each other, on how much we rely on each other, on how much we deliver to each other. I mean, those are going to be really, so we've got to get in front of it. And just looping back to something you said, which I think is just brilliant. I never thought about this in this way before. But when you talk